So colleagues who've joined us, you're welcome. We're going to kick off in a few minutes, just allowing people to rename themselves in the participant list so that we have a sense of where people are coming from.
I see people are coming in. Thank you so much for registering and for showing the interest in this second round of the Planning Disrupted webinar. I would like to start our webinar now. First, as an introduction, for those who haven't been on our first webinar, this is a series of Planning Disrupted topics organized by ISOCARP, International Society of City and Regional Planners. We are based in Den Haag in Netherlands, and we organize this series of the webinar together with a group of our South African partners, which are the SACPLAN, the Cities Network, SALGA, Miele, SAPI, and eThekwini Municipality. We are having something like 2 hours of a webinar. We will start with a plenary session and some presentations from the ISOCARP side and from the side of Cities Network. We will move then to the breakout rooms. I think that you already, during the registration, have chosen your breakout rooms, so you will be automatically dedicated to each breakout room. In case that you don't have a breakout room or something goes wrong, please let us know, rename yourself and give the number of the breakout room in the name. After the breakout rooms, breakout sessions, which will take something a little bit more than an hour, we will go back to the plenary conclusions. The idea of the webinar is, of course, to keep on listening to you. That's what the title of the webinar is, Planning with People. We want to really listen to your opinions about the planning profession and also the opinions of the topics we will have in the plenary and the breakout rooms. So there will be plenty of time for Q&A. Please don't hesitate to place any questions you would like to have in the chat. We will be notifying it and trying to answer all of them if possible. Now, I will give the word to my colleague Rihanna from South African Cities Network. Please, Rihanna, go ahead.
Thanks, Milena, and to all 155 of you who are on this call, you are incredibly welcome. On behalf of all of the partners that Milena has just introduced. I know that we have many planning professionals amongst us today, but we also have many people who are just interested in the topic of planning with people, people like me who are not planners by any stretch of the imagination. But just to take the opportunity as you arrive on the call to ask you to spend a moment, and I note that we've had already some greetings from Philippines and India, so I know that we have people from across the globe joining us, a strong South African contingent, obviously. But to ask you to spend a moment, if you are a planner, just reflecting if you had to introduce planning as a profession to a 10-year-old child, what would you say to a 10-year-old child in one sentence that a planner actually does? So all the planners on the call, please get onto the chat box and indicate how you would introduce your profession to a 10-year-old child in a single sentence. So if you've just joined the call, we're asking all the planners on the call, if you had to introduce planning as a profession to a 10-year-old child, what would you say? Please put it into the chat box. Okay, Abir is saying, take decisions on behalf of you that will affect your own life. Specifically, how would you explain planning? What would you say to a 10-year-old child that what does a planner do? A 10-year-old child says, what does a planner do? And what is your answer? Can we get some answers in the chat box?
I see a beautiful one. It's like playing Minecraft in real life. That's what planners do, playing Minecraft in real life. That's a great answer, because we will be touching on playfulness a little bit later in the plenary.
And I love the one from Ronaldo that talks about helping our communities to have a better place to live. Kathy talks about healing our cities and towns, and Danny to act as a referee between parties that are
fighting on different options. That's also a very good answer. It's
so yeah,
planning.
Interesting perspectives on planning. So Milena, as colleagues are kind of giving a 10-year-old an indication of what the planning profession entails, ISOCARP has been doing some work with planning colleagues in Jakarta. So can I allow you to introduce that?
Yes, I would like to actually give a short introduction to our Young Planning Professionals program. It's a program that it's been developed for our world congresses, but it's also a program that organizes all kinds of workshops which are dedicated to connecting the young planning professionals with the practice and keeping them really up to date. What is the planning practice and how can they apply it in their particular contexts? Last year we had our World Urban Congress in Jakarta in Indonesia, and we organized 2 young planner workshops. One in Jakarta itself, one in the city of Bogor, and both the topics of both planning workshops were planning with people and how to transform the communities together with people. And I would like now to actually show you a short video about that with the results of that YPP workshop.
Hi all, I'm Siddharth, and together with Ruve, Yulia and Diane, we recently managed to create and put together the YPP bus publication for Jakarta and Bogor workshop we had in September 2019. It's sort of a publication that summarizes all the projects, proposals, ideas, experiences we had during the 4 or 5 days of the workshop. And I really just want to take this opportunity and put it out there in the public domain on behalf of the team and see what kind of feedback we get from the larger audience. It all started off with this famous batik prince of Indonesia that stitches the entire country together. It's sort of that one visual element that is so striking in every sense, with its countless patterns, colors, and textures, making it so appealing and enticing to work with. So that's how we sort of came up with the bus publication, but we also had some facts to keep in mind at the same time. It was the second largest ISOCARP workshop, first one being in Asia. So we wanted to make sure we add that cultural element to it and make it bilingual as much as possible to appeal to the wider local audience. This was one of the first rough draft that Ruve was very kind to create to set us in motion towards the final product. And this being the final outcome of it, with planning beyond limits as a theme of the workshop and the Congress. We really wanted to extend this idea of limitlessness into the entire publication as much as we could, really, with Tale of Two Cities being set up by Ruve, fantastically done, setting up Jakarta and Bogor, and then the 2 sites of Duku Atas in Jakarta and Surya Kencana in Bogor. I want to invite you to go through all the projects and ideas that we had. We've also included some experiences of people and participants into the publication. And then eventually I wanted, at the end, I wanted to sort of reveal this mystery of all the colors and patterns that were going on in this entire report. Yeah, that's it really. I really do hope you enjoy reading the publication as much as we have enjoyed creating it, as much as we've enjoyed creating it, the publication and the projects as well, and the experience that we had in the workshop and the Congress. We do look forward to your feedbacks and opinions on the publication as something that we can learn from and implement it further in our next projects or publications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, for playing this short video. As I said, this is just a small snapshot of the activities we have at the Young Planners Professionals segment of ISOCARP. And we will be sharing shortly the link to this publication so you can go deeper into the results and how do we plan together with communities and how our young planners, members of our association, plan with communities. I would like to give word now to Rihanna to show something from the side of South African Cities Network.
Thanks, Milena. Colleagues, if you've just hopped onto the call and you're wondering what's been happening in that chat box, what people have been doing, at least the planners on the call, have been, how would you define the planning profession to a 10-year-old? What would you say it is that planners do? And it's quite fascinating to hear some of your comments. I know that some of you who came in later might not have realized that this is a definition for a 10-year-old. So welcome if you've just joined us. Tando, can I ask you to screen share? And at this point, can I invite in Siwe Ntombela, who's a young professional from the South African Cities Network, to be in conversation with me. So Siwe, very quickly, can you tell our guests, South African Cities Network is one of the co-partners of hosting this workshop with ISOCARP today, this webinar. Who is South African Cities Network and what do they do?
Thanks, Johanna, and hi, everyone. Very excited to be here and be sharing this work. So the South African Cities Network is really exactly that, a network of South African cities, and we engage in research and we're a knowledge sharing platform for South African cities to share knowledge and platforms and research for the purpose of improving practice across municipalities. So the specific program...
On the board there, you guys also create games. Over and above research, you play games, and you've created a game called SATOPOLY. What is this game about? Where does it come from, and why a game?
Well, Rihanna, if I say that we, engage in research and sharing knowledge across cities, it's often in the form of reports, right? But we thought that, this game of SATOPOLY would be a great way to sort of democratize the knowledge and it'd be easy for it to share and using play as a way of learning. So it's based on a report that we did that was then transformed into a board game that people can play in order to consume the knowledge that was embedded in the report.
And the game, as I understand it, Siwe, really sets up the tension, particularly for people working in built environment and trying to transform. Many of you, when you came onto the chat, said if you were speaking to a 10-year-old child, part of your definition was about what it is that you're trying to do to make places better for people. But the SATOPOLY game really sets up a tension between meeting institutional objectives and working with society. Can you give us a little more insight into what it is that SATOPOLY, from actual built environment projects across 4 cities in South Africa, so Zanamvula in Nelson Mandela Bay, Kunubia in eThekwini, Mabopane in the city of Tshwane, and Patterson Park in the city of Johannesburg, 4 very different cities, 4 very different built environment projects, but some learnings that come through that that feel important for colleagues and society more generally to be aware of. What are some of those learnings, Siwe?
Well, yeah, Rihanna, like you said, it sets up the tension in this space between this drive of us, focusing more on institutional value, but it highlights really the tensions that practitioners experience, whether it's in the political admin interface and how they interact with communities, how we set up, economic development opportunities for the communities in which we work in, and different ideas about leadership and what that means, what it looks like. So the game really is focused on teams trying to build towers of institutional versus societal value. And the quotes really are what makes the game what it is. It highlights the different challenges that practitioners experience working to try and advance spatial transformation in our cities?
So, I mean, you talk about quotes, Siwe, and the SAPI game is very much the direct voices of practitioners who are working on trying to change, particularly in the South African context, apartheid spatial planning, and to fundamentally shift the legacy that apartheid spatial planning has left on our towns, on our cities, on our country generally. So just in terms of those direct practitioner quotes, why is practitioner voice? I mean, I think the one thing about SAPI is that it's really practitioner defined research. The practitioners themselves have said, these are the issues we want to research. What is the importance of a practitioner defined research agenda?
Well, I think it's really because of that, Rihanna. I think the way that we've approached planning practice has in many cases been based on theory, and a lot of this theory is, inherited from wherever, there's different perspectives and understandings of it based on a knowledge base that we've internalized that's based on external experiences. But what we find is really that in practice, there's different issues that come about, real life challenges that aren't really reflected in the knowledge. So if you think about the way that knowledge is generated, it's not really based on practice. So this is us targeting the people who are working in cities, trying to advance spatial transformation to understand what is practice telling us about what needs to change.
Okay, so Siwe, one of the things that's come through the SAPI game and over in the work of South African Cities Network is in fact that the personal stories of people who work in institution and the planning profession has a big impact on how people approach their work. So I'm going to at this stage ask you to pause and ask colleagues very quickly in the chat to just think about the extent to which your own life story has shaped your planning work as a professional. So to what extent has your life story shaped? And Siwe, I'm going to move now because we're going to spend just another 2 minutes. I'm going to move now to a magazine that Cities Network is launching today, or a publication from the Built Environment Integration Task Team. Can you tell us a little bit more about this magazine?
Sure. Well, this is about the Built Environment Integration Task Team, which is a group of city practitioners within our network who are working in this field of the built environment. So it's really, the magazine is about bringing now the stories and who is the person behind the title, who is the bait, who are the people who are advancing spatial transformation in our cities. So this magazine really profiles the different individuals across, different age groups, across different race groups, and really just highlighting the different stories that have, made them into the kind of planners that they are, and how their upbringing and personal stories have affected their outlook and what they want to contribute to communities and the planning profession as a whole.
Thanks, Siwe. So, of course, this publication was actually at request of a colleague from eThekwini, Kilekile Lutuli, who can't be with us this morning because she's been summoned to a really important meeting. But Kilekile is a young planner who expressed a need that she wanted to know and be inspired by the stories of other planning professionals. So at this point, Cindy, can I ask you to introduce us to two colleagues by virtue of video from the city of eThekwini who are featured in this publication?
am a loyal and committed person. I agreed when I was appointed that I would do this work. So that alone gets me up in the morning.
It takes a trip out of the office into my car and I go out into the field. And I find that that really gets my motivation all back up to where it needs to be. I want to know that when I die, that upon reflection, that people say that was a life well lived.
So I think when you understand your work and how it fits into the whole city structure, it makes it a bit better, because then you have a full understanding of your role and your contribution to the whole city.
The most precious thing, I think, is actually seeing where you can make a difference. When you go out to a community and you deliver on something that they've conceived themselves with you, and you see the expressions in people's faces, I think it's more rewarding than you can take 10 times more flack and still, you're still motivated.
So thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing that video from South African Cities Network. And Siwe, thank you for bringing this publication about the people behind the planning professionals to launch it together with ISOCARP here today. So colleagues, we want to spend a few minutes now just opening up for any questions that you might have, either to Milena on the Jakarta work or to Siwe on the work that South African Cities Network has been doing, and this publication on who is the Built Environment Integration Task Team and who are the planning professionals behind the work that's happening. So happy to take some questions. If you do have a question, please just raise your virtual hand. Also happy to hear kind of your personal story and how it has informed your planning practice. So we have a few minutes to be in conversation with you. Please feel free to.
I'm just checking the raised hands so far. You can also type your question in the chat, so we can include you in the program. Let's say live.
So Milena, maybe to come back to the Jakarta video. Okay, there is Osbert. You have your hand raised. Can we take you from Uganda, Osbert?
Yep.
Please come.
Yes, morning viewers.
Hi, morning.
Ask how you can differentiate planning from politics.
Great question, Osbert, and it's one we will talk about here, and hopefully you'll take into your breakaway sessions as well. Ndumiso?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is just regards to the publications by the South African Cities Network. More importantly, I just wanted to find out, do they or is their work around informal settlements and the planning around informal settlements and around informality within the publications? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those questions. Let's kick off with responses to those. Milena, I don't know whether you want to come in on Osbert's question on politics and planning, but Osbert, just to say to you, in another life, I was, I guess, what you would refer to, that's popularly referred to as a politician. I was the member of the mayoral committee for planning for transport in the city of Johannesburg. But Milena, do you want to come in from an ISOCARP perspective, planning, politics, interface?
Yes, I will just shortly reflect on that. Of course, the link between planning and the politics is always there. Sometimes it's really the big elephant in the room that no one dares to talk about the politics and how planning serves the politics of the day, So I think that what we need to acknowledge here is that at one point of our careers as planners, we will be dealing with politics a lot. So I will really like to kind of make a plaidoy to include more political education in the planning education, because that's something that it's part of the planning reality, even if it's not really always said so or presented, so it is very much part of the political reality.
Thanks, Milena. Siwe, of course, the work of Cities Network also picks up in a big way on, in fact, what you saw in that video was actually practitioners working through the political system and trying to understand what it means to navigate it. But Siwe, let's have you respond to Dumiso's question about informal settlements. And there was also a request in the chat that if colleagues want to get a hold of the Setopoly game, how do they do that?
Okay, yeah, maybe just to add on the point about the politics as well, I think it's something that's also come up a lot in the built environment work, especially because we're trying to work in spatial transformation, and often the distinction between the politics and the administration sort of makes it difficult sometimes for planners to do their work, in a sense where the abrupt changes in the politics can often, undermine the work of planners and the relationships that they often have with the community. So there's definitely a lot of tension that also comes about in the stories that we speak about in some of the practitioner profiles. But on the work of Cities Network, to respond to Ndumiso about informal settlements, there's quite a few pieces of work. One that comes to mind now is specifically on the work with the Socioeconomic Rights Institute, SARI, that happened between the South African Cities Network in collaboration with SARI, specifically to highlight the difficulties and challenges that disabled women specifically experience living in informal settlements. And so especially in the webinars and conversations we've been having now during COVID, we've really tried to bring in those voices into the conversations that we have with the task team to really draw much closer connections between that and the work. But I'm happy to share anything else if there's still more curiosity from your side.
So I know that there are further raised hands. Osbert, I think you wanted to come back, and then I also we're about to go into breakaway rooms in a few minutes, but I also want to invite in, and Siwe, maybe you can just post links in the chat to some of the research work. But I also want to invite in, after Osbert, Prithvi Duna from Oman, who talks about how her life experiences have influenced her role in the planning profession. So let's take Osbert, and then if we can take Prithvi, and I think there's one other hand that's up as well, which I'll note in a minute. Osbert?
Yes, thank you for your clarification. But the 21st century planning has become more of a politics issue as politicians limit the work of the physical planners and planners at large. So as EcoPark would like to get more of your views expressed outside the media, and then we can see how our profession as planners has been controlled by the politicians in a way that planners can do their role without politicians interfering in their profession. Thank you. I'm Osbert from Uganda.
So Osbert, I mean, I think this opens up a very important conversation. And I mean, I think it might even be, Milena, a topic for a subsequent webinar, because as I said, having been a so-called politician or elected representative myself, I'm not always convinced that the way in which we're setting up an unnecessary tension between planners and politicians is the way in which we're going to get better outcomes in planning with people. And maybe it is potentially a topic for another webinar. And Dumiso, is that the same hand from earlier, or did you want to come back?
It's a new hand.
It's a new hand. I see also one new hand, but maybe we can take two hands and then wrap it up.
We can give the other person a chance because I've already spoken, but then I can come again if we still have time.
Okay.
Okay. I see here raised hand from Samke Funeka from KwaZulu-Natal. Do you want to pose a question, Samke?
No, actually, I'll pass. Thanks.
Okay, that's also good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And Dumiso, do you want to come back, and then we're going to move into breakout rooms in a few minutes?
So For one, it's the politics. That is a very big one. And thank you. If we can get that another session with that, just so that we can understand, planners would say, how are they dealing with that in their spaces. But for me, I've always been of the view that at times as officials and practitioners, we have let politics.
Okay, Ndemiso, we're losing you there, but I think Ndemiso was about to say we've left politicians behind, and see where in fact the South African Cities Network work is very much showing that just the very technical nature of reports, not understanding how the political environment works, that there really needs to be a closer conversation. And I know that Soobs has also posted in the chat that the role of politicians in planning vary globally, and there are good and bad practices. But I think we're going to transition this conversation now into the breakaway rooms. So you would have at registration already indicated which of the breakout rooms you would like to be in. So Ashraf Adam, I had seen you here, and I know that last time you had hosted a breakaway room called The Dark Side of Planning. So we've decided to go with one called The Bright Side of Planning Disruption and How We Plan with People, which will be hosted by Cities Network and Soobs from eThekwini Municipality. UPAT and ISOCARP will be doing one on community-oriented plans. Milena will be the facilitator there, methods and approaches for successful implementation. SAPI, Zintle will be there on establishing community partnerships, a challenge for planning practitioners, and then the South African Local Government Association, Practitioner, leading that breakaway session on unlocking local identities in municipal planning, building on the municipal assets. So in a minute, you're going to be taken into the breakaway rooms. There is a technical team that will be available to assist you if you don't transition into the breakaway room seamlessly. We will be coming back from those breakaway rooms at 12 o'clock or just before 12. Milena, anything that you want to add as we move into breakaways?
No, I think we are at the point of opening the breakaway rooms. Please see these rooms as really as a collaborative space, a space when you can express your ideas and a space when you can really react to everything that is being presented. After the breakaway rooms, we will come back here at the plenary and share the findings of each of the breakout rooms. So stay tuned and stay with us.
A warm morning to everybody, colleagues, friends, some people I haven't seen for a long time. Thanks for being with us today. I'm going to do a very quick, sometimes dense presentation on my experiences and hopes on voices in planning and how it can help to shift what we do in municipal planning and in practice. I'm sharing with Siwe Ntombela from SACN, and so we try to do this postmodern thing that way. I stop, she starts, and I come in and let's just see and just bear with us. So I'm just going to not rush through, but I'm going to be quite quick. And maybe if there are questions, if we can just bring it to the end, I'll appreciate that, if that's okay. So this is the presentation outline, but I think before and whilst I might not touch on every slide, but because you will get the presentation, I think it's important just to share that I'm presenting a snippet, a section from my PhD thesis, which thank God it's final, adjudicated, awarded, etc. So maybe that's less of the pressure. But essentially, arriving at the topic for me wasn't as difficult as normally it is, because for people that know me, I've spent 27 years in the municipality. I decided that I want to be a municipal planner and I want to be in the municipality. And was largely about understanding what that space is and what that system is and how I can then understand and change from within. And that has always been my intention. Needless to say that I ran the department or the unit for 10 years. We amalgamated the city, which is now 2,300 square kilometers, 100-kilometer coastline. It is an African city, rich places, poor places, townships, peri-urban, rural, declining CBDs, eco estates, gated communities, a fantastic port, etc. So for me, that was like, it was always a burning passion about what we're doing in planning, and is there another way of knowing and seeing and broadening how we do planning for practice. Why I was so consumed on this was on a daily basis, I had to sign off appeal reports, applications, special consents, rezonings, environmental applications, etc. And when I engaged with the planners and my colleagues, and always said like, but this doesn't seem that bad. Why are we refusing it? And the response was, no, you know, it's not in the town planning scheme. It's a housing project. It's outside the urban development line, or whatever the case is. And then it like dawned on me, like, where is this and where it comes from, and what opportunities we have to change, and is this like really determining and directing planning? So that got me into my journey. So having said that, I think you've heard my conversation behind, and I'm not going to tell you what is on the presentation outline, because I think you also had a chance to look at it. I will dive right into it. So the call for planning is, you know, it's always, I mean, in any profession, you have to renew and you have to rethink and work on what you've got. But the call for planning, in particular for the 21st century, which is a break from the 20th century, is really, you know, that it's demanding new approaches to planning theory and practice, and especially in the context where current forms of planning remain resilient, remain stubborn, and they fail. But we've not replacing this with some form of consciousness and methods in planning. And there's a great detailed synopsis of planning, a gold report by the UN Habitat. I implore people to look at it. But I think moving ahead, COVID-19, climate change, and much more to come has actually created the space and urgency for planning to change. So before, when you waited a lot longer for things, you now actually have that space. We actually have that space to take it on. What also emerges as what has changed a lot is the challenge and taking on the dominance from the north to the south, planning theory and practice, and giving recognition to the south, but included in the south is the notion of African urbanism as an ideology for planning. And this cannot be underestimated as what this means for planning theory and planning practice. One of my favorite authors, The Worlding of Planning, really speaks about planning epistemology or knowledge in planning for building theory and practice, and makes the call and the plea that it needs to come from within as opposed to elsewhere. And in all of this, there's this opportunity about multiplicity of voices, the lived experiences, the everyday people that negotiate and produce space. And what does this mean, and what does this offers as an opportunity for planning and as a surprise? Because at the end of the day, we're planning with and for society. So surely we need to engage in that space to much more to the current context than what we do. So this was the research. Like I said, you'll have the presentation. It was really about understanding planning knowledges within the Metropolitan Municipality of eThekwini, an African city, a city, as you know, for all the changes it's gone through, like any other South African city and many African cities and cities in the South. But really it was about, is there something, it was an exploration, is there something that one can learn from practice and theorize from practice for theory, but also back to practice, and can it transform practice? That was really the intention of the entire study. There were 5 sub-questions, but in this particular conversation, I'm just going to run through what came through in exploring a multiplicity of stakeholders and their perspectives on planning, knowledges, and experience, and how this can inform planning differently and practice. The research design really focused on 4 areas, or 4 big areas of methodology. It was interpretive, it was qualitative, not mixed methods. And if you're asking me why I'm so adamant about it, we can probe that later offline. But nonetheless, being somebody within planning, really much part of the planning practice that eThekwini has designed, institutional ethnography was a great way to be an insider and outsider. So I should have said this in the beginning. These are my views as a planner within the city, but it's not necessarily the city's views. So I think just to respect the difference in boundaries in space. Needless to say that what actually emerged is in my life and my notions as practice of a planner, I've always been at management and not on the coal face. So it really got me to understand the daily workings of what happens in planning. I then also had a wonderful array of interviews, and I was never really sure of who to interview, and across a spectrum of people. focus groups, but it's really about the non-probability sample, which excites me. 168 interviews in English and isiZulu from ordinary people. Yes, it was convenient, so the generalizations are limited. And as you can see, we have like what we call SACPLAN centers, maybe in Joburg they have Tusang centers. In other places of the world, they call them something else, maybe just like City Hall, whatever it is. But it cuts across a great selection of history, place, people, race, income, time, etc., critical histories, and from KwaMashu in the north to Umlazi in the south as a case in point, or a new emerging place like Mshlanga, and then the review of documentation. So what did all of this firstly say? Yes, it reaffirmed planning knowledge. And planning knowledge to me is not just land use planning and not just strategic planning. I look at them both in this, you know, they might have different ways of thinking and doing, but they still construct space, they still manage space, they still, it is still an activity of municipal planning. And often when you read about land use planning or spatial planning, it really takes a strategic role and not necessarily dealing with the regulatory role, which consumes and delves so much in municipal planning, and it would be wrong to arbitrarily separate them. So it did the obvious. It confirmed that what I regard as planning knowledges as spatial development frameworks, town planning schemes, environmental plans, parking standards, standard operating procedures. This is very much the core frame of planning knowledges we work with. But more importantly, it is this knowledge that actually directs planning. It then actually then goes back into this and asks why. And it's really about how our legislation is set up, our planning legislation. Maybe in other parts of the world it's different. But in our planning legislation, we actually give legal authority for the policy, for the expert knowledge that our planners, both inside as well as consultants, would craft and put together as the knowledge to practice planning. And this becomes legally binding. So in conclusion, it really a lot resides on expert knowledge. And who are the knowledge actors in that? There's a range of social relationships that prevail when you get into that particular subject, but that's for another day. But essentially what it is saying is that practitioners, the planning profession, we are the people that actually rewrite this planning knowledge that we use in practice. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it's not lawyers. And the way we do it between the split between the expert, the executive, the political, and the community is part of the problem, and it's part of the solution. The many roles, then the next thing that emerged was like, okay, we know it's important, we know it's legally binding, but how is it actually used and how is it actually misused in practice? So as I said, it is legally binding, and it will matter, it will still carry weight, whether it's rational or irrational or outdated. The scheme will carry weight. The SDF will carry weight, as a case in point. Practitioners had no choice because this is legally binding. They need to practice what is of legal importance now. The appeal authorities had little choice because first they need to see that we follow process, and secondly, have we applied our knowledge, which is legally binding. The issue about reason and is it reasonable, etc., that would come later and really doesn't really apply. So for lack of time, I won't go through all of this, but basically what also came through is like why we tweak changes. Where are we getting where's our notions of consciousness and ideology in how we rewrite this, whether it's town planning scheme reviews, whether it's how we look at an application, where we introduce new zones, concepts, definitions, etc. All of that comes to play. I will just maybe skip the slide and continue to the next slide. So when I review the literature about how important the voice is in planning, what comes through and reaffirms is that we have to start thinking about theory and practice in context. And with this goes the ideas and the notions and the embracing of African urbanism, what it is, how different it is, and how our societies are working and renegotiating that all of time. And we need to do that as planners, and planning knowledge we create that eventually becomes legally binding. How and where it comes from, the genealogy, problematization, where this comes from. Because often there's a whole political understanding, there's a core frame of the profession, What are the problems and what are the solutions? And part of it is the abstraction of what this is. And it's not just something travels and lands with us, but it's also how we allow it to assimilate. So it's quite nuanced. And then Sandercock, another great reading, is also plants this notion of what are multiple epistemologies, what, how, and who. And more importantly, it is that this remains the incomplete project of planning. This is what planning grapples with, of how it serves better and better for society, the environment, for the political, and for the notions of how we want to transform, heal, etc. It's never complete, it is political, it's partial, it's incomplete, and it's something that works closely with expert knowledge. Having understood this and understood how we abstractly define the planning knowledges about what is a special concept, what are zones, what is freely permitted, what is done by special consent, what is prohibited. There's a set of notions, abstractions that we have about how society will respond. But coming together with a collection of theorists, what comes through is that we need more flexibility. Society is flexible, so should society be, so should planning be. We need super codes so that we don't deal with the mundane and the specific all the time. We need simple legislation that people want to comply. We need knowledge and rules that are tacit knowledge, practical knowledge, and more importantly, because we're dealing with so many actors, they become self-regulators in this. They become the points of coordination. What it also revealed was that we need to nurture a culture of how we grow this knowledge. Who are the agents inside municipalities, planning associations, academic institutions, ratepayers associations, civics, etc., and understand there's a multiplicity of knowledge agents in making up this planning knowledge. More importantly, the way we and I've said this before, the way we split, and maybe this will come through in the later webinar or something, how we split between experts, society, and political. That's a problem because we're building actually public policy. And in building public policy, we need to get closer. We need to be more blurrier because this then gives you efficacy in the public policy we generate, the relevancy, as the relevance as well as the transparency. So I'll leave that around just some of the specifics. I'll pause here for a moment. My colleague Siwe will pick up on the eThekwini pilot visualizations. So I don't know, Siwe, just prompt me on what you need me to do and I'll take it further. Thanks.
Thanks, Subs. Okay, so I think there's quite a lot of similarities, maybe points of convergence between, you know, the work that you've been doing and this project that we've done. So this Visualization Studios project is really about getting a different diversity of actors, a multiplicity of stakeholders to really come together to define, you know, visually what the transformed future city looks like in South Africa. So this has happened, you know, we've hosted these virtual studios across 6 cities so far, and the first one was in eThekwini. So really the whole purpose of it is really to engage in a different way and speak about the city from the experiences of people, and then move into how then do we transform, you know, the way cities work now. What kind of experiences do you want to have in the future? So the methodology is really different, using a lot of artistic expression. We've used, you know, body movements, people explaining the city as a creature, people building the future city from objects that they find in their homes. So we're really trying to democratize this space and to say you don't necessarily have to have a certain background or knowledge of the city, because by virtue of being in the city, obviously you have a right to be in conversation about it and hopefully to define what the future of the city looks like. So really from the experience, it's really been quite challenging, especially under the current times of the pandemic, where we weren't physically able to go into the different cities, but really trying to include different actors. So specifically from eThekwini, we were able to attract people who were homeless, in fact, into the conversation, from the Dennis Hurley Center. There were people working from NGOs. There were a lot of students and artists, academics from the university, some practitioners from the city as well. And really, it's about, you know, visibly seeing this tension and different perspectives of the city from different people. And then how do we plan around that? What kind of city emerges from all of these different experiences and people that we have? So there's a lot of issues that have come about from you know, the process that we've undergone. Maybe if you go to the next slide, Subs, then I can show some of the you know, outcomes from the session. So what you see from the first frame with the hands is really, we try to get participants to say, what kind of taxi signal sign would you give to go to a special place in the city? So people had their hands together to symbolize praying, and that's the you know, the taxi symbol that they use to go into to a place of worship. And the picture underneath that was really about, you know, what I spoke about, of people building the future city from home objects and saying what different objects represent and what they'd like to see in the city. So people put, you know, shoes to represent a walkable city, or a water bottle to represent, you know, sustainable means of using our resources. Lots that you get from using different tools. Speaking about the city, you know, planning is really just for these certain people who are experts, but really people understanding people who live and experience the city as experts as well. So the last picture at the end there, at the bottom, is really just a skyline that we've developed for the future of the city of Durban. That's really based on what, you know, people were saying in the session. So we used lots of different artists who were able to translate, you know, the words that people were throwing into the session into different visual, you know, ideas, and saying this is what the future of the city would look like from the perspective of people. So really, my not really a tension, but really a question, maybe throwing it back to Subs, is to say then all of this energy that people, you know, really express, and to say, this is what I want to see in my community, this is the skills and resources and the passion that I have. How does, you know, a city structure in the way that it is right now really, how is it able to absorb, I mean, all of these ideas, these energies? Where do people who don't understand the language of IDPs, how do they, you know, those voices get filtered into the system? And it's really something that I'm hoping we can do from this work, is to build a different participatory tool, a toolkit for city practitioners, for engaging with communities, to see how we can in a different way sort of harness the ideas and the energies that people have to develop these future city visuals. Because we speak of all of these future plans, and to say our cities must be inclusive and sustainable, and there must be jobs, but there aren't any physical or visuals or graphics and imagery to represent what this future transformed city is. So maybe going back to you, Subs, you were speaking about this whole difficulty of a complexity of actors, but where in this current, you know, frame do we fit all of these voices, and how do they infiltrate back into the system to have an impact, really?
Thanks, Siwe.
Oops, can I just check, will 5 more minutes do it for you? Then can we open out into discussion with colleagues in the room?
I think it could, but if I could just move this, I don't know, I'm stuck. I'll try now. So just to pick up on where Siwe left, there's definitely ways in which we can take the everydayness and blend and work and confront what we use as you know, as a practice, as a profession. Guys, I don't know. Maybe this is where it ends.
So maybe this is where the people take over the legal process.
Yeah, so people have like taken over, but it's moved since. And really, like I said, I think we're useful just to quickly whiz through what this notion of everyday people were saying, and what it means to the hard wire of planning. as well as the soft side of planning, you know. So like I said, it was a personal journey. I wanted to know what it is that I'm missing, what this other 2/3 of you know, that we don't touch sides with, spatially and people-wise, what does it mean? And it could be more than that. So with the informant interviews and activist stories, I hope to distill some key areas of focus. With also a focus group from practitioners within the municipality, we resolved on 6, call it 7 themes. So it was a bit of a touch and go, because we really didn't know how people will respond to it. But like Siwe said, people live in the city, they have opinions, they've experienced planning, they work with neighbors, they doing things, etc. How all of this comes in the mix. So the first session was really, or section was really about the socioeconomic status of respondents. The second was really the 6 themes, and that was really getting from a neighborhood context. What does that mean? From your own house, your own home context, what does that mean? Theme 2 was really about integration around race, class, you know, student housing, etc. What does that mean? And then the notions of control, how conflict should be addressed, the issues about illegality. I have this view that people are just doing what they want. And then it comes back, you'll see later that people are saying, if I can work with what I have, my livelihoods, not create hardships, practical rules, I would love to be compliant, and we'll see that coming through shortly. And then knowledge about the town planning scheme, about the awareness, perceptions, benefits, and lastly about community perspectives on this. What makes for a good neighborhood? How does this shift what we're doing as municipal planning, but as the municipality, not just as planning? So what came through as a high level is high levels of flexibility and tolerance towards a mix of uses and typologies. There are some nuances between race, place, and the nature of typologies, and this is just a very crude representation. I did some cross-tabulation, etc., but bearing in mind generalizations cannot be made with this particular type of sample. Integration and diversity, this was less of an issue, but it came with responsibilities about how do you manage this. So like social housing, inclusion housing, what does it mean? It's not a problem, but how do you actually manage it? Low levels of town planning schemes, you know, in terms of the areas that we looked at. Levels of control between neighbors and council, etc., was moderate. Addressing conflicts was totally in opposite to what the planning practice does. Compliance was surprisingly quite high, despite what our views as the profession. And the negotiables, the non-negotiables, what we must manage out was what we call big public bads, and surprisingly, social problems, and that's around pollution. I won't go through the detail because you'll have this, but that just tells you the number of men, at least 60% to women. The age was largely a mature age group, the racial categorization there, historical racial categorization. We have low incomes, so most of it was under 5,000, and then between 5 and 10, a small component, and then very, very small, moderate in that case. And that's quite indicative of most of our cities. And because it was a convenient sample, the levels of education would be higher than what you would expect in the city. So from where people were employed, just give you a sense of where people were employed. And 87% of the people came from the 6 Sizakala centers, and the 13 came from other places. But this, because we worked back, you know, they would be at, like say, at Pinetown, but they may actually be living in Hammersdale, as an example. Nature of ownership, 58% owned, 41% did not own. Most of it was freestanding homes. Flats, 18%, townhouses, 8.9%. I did not go into informal settlement or traditional area. On the neighborhood, and we get like, it should be very easy, and then, you know, I bring that together in very easy, and then difficult and very difficult. So just looking down here, you can see a home with a creche or a school regarded as very easy. Community facilities, same. Religious to some extent, and I think there's a social compromise and negotiation that needs to happen there. Shops and restaurants, the same. Home business to a certain extent. Offices we can pick up, and I think there's a particular cultural issue around typologies, etc., and as well as that about flats and duplexes, etc. On your own property, people were very opinionated. They exercised caution, not like how we think in planning that if you leave it free, everybody wants the same thing. They'll go for the maximum use. And you can see as we move along from a residential plus a shop, there was so many for yes, 60%, 60.1. But as we get to a residential plus a shop plus industry, 19%. Residential only, less than 1%, just to give you a sense of where we focus energies on and where the slice of African, a slice of an African society is actually asking us to navigate to. Managing conflicts, 46% was really about it should be mediation and conflict resolution. With 14% of that was really around the local ward councillor and the ward committee, something very different to what we have in the planning field that we're working. Community meetings were important. Court proceedings, there was a recognition that this would also happen. And then the regular notions of where we advertise and written appeals was very low. Awareness in town planning was only 70% in those areas we looked at.
Soups, 1 more minute, huh?
Okay. Negative uses, the biggest came in was really about casinos, taverns, music events, and then also what would be truck shops, workshops, etc. And then lastly was this notion about council facilities not being managed being a problem, and non-residential was low. And so what I ended off with was 2 conflicting ideologies. On the left-hand side, mainly with the practitioners, public and private, and academia in inverted commas, and the built environment sectors, was really about how we need to extend the planning we have, extend the town planning schemes, and we need a lot more of. So we need more political, more support, not understanding or having an ambivalence approach to how much control we have as municipal planning, or do we have less control. But very clearly also people are tired, they're trying their best, and they're also looking for help. As when I mean people, I mean the practitioners. Lastly, on the right, strange bed partners between community activists, legal experts, residents, councils and business and traditional authorities, was really about it's a time to organize, a time to engage, it's a time to make planning less technical, to make it more readable, to remove the barriers, to work politically as well as to work professionally. And this was from the committee of a town planning committee. I interviewed both ANC and DA councils, so I had a whole committee that I could interview. And then I will just leave it there. What actually emerges, the final point is that the lived experiences were really asking for something very different from municipal planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Soups. So Bantumbele, you have a question. I'm going to ask you to actually come in with your voice into the conversation and the question you're asking, Soups.
It's Bantumbele from University of KwaZulu-Natal. Interesting status, still review findings. I was saying in many instances, the profession, the square off, it lies with the fact that it is. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Bantu. I mean, I think you're raising issues around the land question, and then the what Soups had touched on around an African urbanism and the extent to which things are coming from the West and out of touch with our reality. I can also give activity issues. Does that cover you?
Yes.
That we failed.
So
I mean, I think you've got
basically.
Please go, Bantu.
Yes, so I was saying that the nexus of the planning profession in an African context is that we have not cut the umbilical cord from our and these continue to purport their agenda of neocolonialism, whereby in the South African context, 20 years into democracy, legacy, apartheid, and in this theme of disrupting planning, planners have failed to challenge this gap with locally driven or decolonial methodologies that speaks to these issues. What we've done is that we are a bad imitation of the West.
Okay, Bantu, can I ask you to hold it there? And I'm not necessarily going to ask Soups and Siwe to respond. I want to open up this really big issue that Bantu is raising to other people in the room around what does an African urbanism that is in touch and responsive to our reality and works with a whole different ideology, what does it look like? Where does it come from? how do we change? And I mean, it's interesting just your notion, even in just on your picture on the screen, that the system was never broken, it was built this way. So can I note other hands? I'm not going to kind of set up Subs and Siwe as the only experts in the room. So can we get other people who might want to respond to the issue that Bantu is raising? I'm just going to check for hands. If there aren't any, then Subs, do you want to come in and Siwe?
I see Leka's hand is up, and maybe
Okay,
Sarah
sorry.
from
Thanks for that.
UCLG wants to respond also.
Okay, sorry, I'm struggling to see. There you go, Leka and then Yvonne.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Rihanna. I think what we need to realize is that planning has evolved over a period of time, right? And I'll speak in the South African context because I think we've got mostly South Africans here. Once upon a time, you know, our town planning ordinances and our planning was talking about coordinated and harmonious planning. So planners kind of focused on that, and that is why the kind of responses I think that would have been received in SUBS in her questionnaires and stuff like that. And then, of course, planning and its deliverable changed completely because we needed to realign ourselves with what South Africa was actually all about and our growth plans, etc. So we took then our development principles, which started to then talk to what Subs was talking about, consciousness. And I think that we were starting to then, as planners, looking at transformation of cities, equality, spatial justice. But Rihanna, for me, as planners in the country, we haven't actually unpacked that to the extent that we should be actually practicing it. You know, we're talking about now making town planning schemes comply with these set of development principles. But we as planners ourselves are actually grappling with what this actually means in the South African context. So I think there needs to be a conversation to kind of like now start to shape norms and standards or kind of policy around the development principles that are now included in our law that will allow us to be more conscious and change our planning methods going forward. So just my input.
Thanks, Leka. Yvonne?
Okay, thank you. I think for me, I'll probably take it from the perspective of Ghana because that's where I come from. And African urbanism basically is what we make it as Africans. I mean, if you take Ghana, for instance, yes, we were colonized by the British, there were planning schemes and so forth. But when they left, a lot of those things fell away. And I mean, towns and our urban centers started to develop organically. So what you see now is people say it's chaotic. Yes, it's chaotic, but it still works. You know, without even what we'll say orderly planning, we still have retained our sense of community. We still have retained quite a big informal economy, which really works. I mean, up until recently, probably about 5 years ago, South African businesses came in to invest in malls and so forth. But when you look at the use of it, a lot of people still prefer to go to the traditional markets rather than go to the malls. The malls are sort of for a few, in a sense, or you go there as and when needed. But generally, people still prefer markets. So I think if we had to describe the African urbanism, it's about what Africans make it, because it involves our cultures and our traditions, and we need to accept it. If we say we are going to use still the Eurocentric models and so forth, we lose some of these things that we still have in our traditions and cultures that we so sort of cherish. Yeah, so that's
Thanks, Yvonne. Can I invite in Sarah?
Yeah, hello from Barcelona. I'm Sarah from UCLG, and very interesting. Congratulations to SUBS and CV to this presentation. So my point, when I saw, I think the confidence of the legally binding, that planning is automatically legally binding. So I would like to make a point there, because usually planning is also a point to find how to set the priorities. There's never the possibility, in particular the budget, neither the capacity to do all what is needed. So usually the city lags behind the need for service delivery, the need for urbanization, and the priorities are taken by council, and then the problem of the community and how is the community voice really empowered so that it can influence council decisions when priorities will be narrowed. So this is mainly on the implementation part of planning, because in my own experience, I can say when I work in southern cities, very often the planning is a little bit separated to what is the implementation. And then you feel it is a lot of time, not only of the planners, but mainly of the community, is energy lost if things are not done. And the windows of what is possible, the budget for being allocated in participatory way is getting smaller and smaller, because it is not possible for the city, neither the technical capacity to do so many small projects, neither the willingness of the council, because the councillors feel that they are elected for taking the decisions. So that's my question. So the point of participatory expectations, a raise of expectations versus the capacity of implementing.
Thanks, Sarah. Subs, I mean, I think you alluded to quite strongly in your presentation, and the questions are also taking us in that direction of the politics, the community voice, the legal instruments, and finding the balance and the energy that's already there in communities, which I think Yvonne has also picked up to some extent, and I think Siwe has picked up on the energy that's there. How do we start, if we're talking about planning with people realistically, and Sarah's just raised some of the constraints that might be there, realistically, what's possible?
Thanks, Rihanna, and thanks to friends and colleagues for the interesting comments and questions. I can only say I agree with everybody. That's the easier way out. But I think what is possible, firstly, I think, and I mean, not because I did work on municipal planning and planning knowledges, but it's something that governs so much of our time and activity in municipal planning. So I do think we need to take a bigger sense of research, be the social scientists in planning, and start, not like, I mean, Leka saying it is evolved, true, but we really have to project where we need to go ideologically and be bold about doing things, because we seem to be more scared and risk adverse about leaving something and changing something that we know all the time, and it doesn't work. So I think for me, that's one aspect that we can hear in the resources. And what's good about that is it's not on a timeline. It's not like here's an application and it's got 30 days or 60 days or 120 days. We can build that project on an ongoing basis. And I think it ties in with Bantu's request about, you know, the North and the South, as well as Yvonne. But municipal planning in a South African and I'm just guessing here in a wider African context, there's a lot of mandate for municipal planning. So really, as a profession and with other professionals, and sectors, we need to shape this differently. So I think in Leka's response was, where do we start? How do we unpack? We've not seen that kind of research and theory building. And when I mean theory building, not to be academic, but to be real about what we can do for our city. So I think we need to start that particular agenda. Another key response would be simple things, and I think it's great we actually in COVID to some extent from that perspective is really we've decided to in eThekwini to waive all planning costs. The cost of people not submitting something and keeping out of a system versus what actual money we get is, you know, it's incomparable. Maybe to the people that are running the budgets, yes, to a certain extent. But I really think we need to make it less expensive, and we need to structure those differently, not just for big business, but for everybody as business. The informal economy, another case in point, and I know I can see that I'm speaking too much, so sometimes don't give me the podium, so to speak. But I think the informal economy, we're paying a lot of lip service to it. We're actually wasting the energies and actually not wasting, but we're actually, what's the word? We're actually irritating, we're interfering with good energies when we could be doing so many things differently to harness those energies. And then lastly, I think we need to get the political involved. And I, through my work, I've also discovered some kind of ways in which we think and how we can engage the political. And it's simple. The planners, as planners, we think, depending which city you are, we think that the political are just political for interest. And it's not always the case. And planning is not always correct. And they're also very much out of touch what happens in local communities. And it's the ward councillor that knows. You know, I'm just giving an example in that. So let me pause there.
Okay, thanks, Hoops. Siwe, there were a couple of questions that are being raised in relation to resources and participation. And I mean, I think your visualization studios in the midst of COVID are beginning to show that it's not always, it doesn't always have to be incredibly resource intensive. There are other ways. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, sure, Rihanna. I think this is, you know, it's challenging, especially because this whole doing participation virtually can become exclusionary to a lot of people. But I think it's just with the amount of effort and attention that you pay to people who you know would be excluded. So for example, like I said, we were able to bring in voice of people who were homeless and people working with orphans and NGOs in the point area of the city. So I think it's really about trying to listen and pay better attention to what is already happening and how we can harness those voices of people who are really you know, in that space and doing work there. But also at the same time, I think we look at participation in the same static way as, you know, before of, you know, the same, you know, participatory tools and methods, but, you know, working in this visual way and making it accessible to everyone and using different language, for example, and not making it, you know, sort of this expert versus the recipient of whatever it is, or beneficiary, you know, that sort of mentality. So I think it's even in the way that we speak about it, in the way that we, you know, provide a space and a platform for people to speak on this. I don't think it needs to be resource intensive because there are already people and, you know, places that we can harness that can connect us to these different types of people. So I think it's in the way that we do the participation that can allow us to reach in our wider audience.
Can I just bring in Yvonne's provocation in the chat? Because Yvonne says he or she who has the loudest voice and the most resources often wins, be it in an institution or in communities. I mean, is this kind of notion that you're raising, is it essentially idealistic, or can we get to the point where we really are planning with people?
I don't want to necessarily say that it's idealistic, because I feel like in the way that we've been able to host the studios, it really has been able to be democratic. But what is quite you know, disheartening maybe is from the participant side. You know, we've engaged over like 200 people from across cities.
Okay, so Siwe, I'm going to come in with Tony's question, because I know you dealt with this. Tony's saying data costs are a major barrier to unresourced communities, but you got through that. How did you do that?
Yes, so I think what has helped us is definitely because of this fact that we're hosting these webinars and, you know, studio sessions virtually, that we've saved a lot on costs that we would have, you know, been traveling and catering and venues and all of that. So we were able to say, you know, send us your cell phone number, we'll send you data. And people were able to then, you know, come into the sessions. You know, people living in informal settlements, in townships, people participated in the studio in a taxi on their way to work, for example. So I think that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know, really paying attention and listening into what, you know, people need, and then meeting them at that point. So yeah, I'm very proud of that fact, actually.
So I want to transition back, Soups, to you and other colleagues who are in this room. Sometimes when we talk planning with people, we often talk about communities out there and eliciting their voice and their participation. But in fact, our ability to plan with people in the institution and organization, and certainly the work that Cities Network has been doing, and part of what SAPI shows, that we're not that great, even at planning with people in our own institutions as a municipality. Can we reflect on that a little bit? And I'm also happy to take in other voices of people in the room.
Thanks, Rihanna and Siwe. I mean, even within a planning branch or a planning unit, when people are recreating planning instruments or knowledge, as I refer to it, there's a range of social relations of why people are included and excluded, you know, between practitioners, implementers, and strategic planners, etc. So as well as within the implementation side as well. So that is a case in point. And I think that's the politics. So when we speak about politics, there's not only politics between a politician and a planner or professional. There's politics within politics within the professional database itself, the professionals themselves. There's politics, and I think that's
so what do we do? I mean, I think that we know, and that issue has been diagnosed, the issue of silo mentality, the issue of the inability for people to work together for a bigger picture. How do we get out of having that conversation endlessly and actually shifting that practice as it's happening?
I think there's leadership, and it can come from anywhere. So I'm just saying, like in the eThekwini case, like just say around town planning schemes, and you want to do something differently in the inner city, and all, you know, yes, you probably will find some barriers, but there's ways in which you can transcend and make that more visible. And also the alliances you create outside with planners outside, NGOs or developers to share a similar idea. So to be the astute planner, you also have to be political and strategic, put it that way. I also think that there's leadership that also, yes, there's a top down and leadership bottom up. So like I said, it can come from anywhere. I also think that gearing in a particular project or space often helps to break some of the silos, not always, but often helps. Like I know I struggle in the inner city, but at least there's a common space with so many municipal departments. I do think that as cities and this performance systems we really have to make performance more principle driven. So as an example, I would like to see a clean and safe inner city, and everybody in the whole municipality covers that from 83 departments. So it makes it everybody's responsibility. So those are just some examples. And I just one more thing I just wanted to suggest is some basic, as Siwe was saying, there's some basic examples that does not take too much resources, but it does take time. We've kind of lost the ability. And I remember in late 90s, I was training councillors madly around planning. I was training myself and councillors, but we don't talk. We don't train people around what it is, what's the scheme, how we use it, community workers. We were the first city to have community development workers. So I'm saying there's a lot of things we've done, we've lost. So even as planning, it's not like we've never done this, and there's a lot of new things, but there's a lot of things we've lost as we become more and more specialized. So yeah, I'll just pause for a moment.
Thanks, Soups. So colleagues, the one thing I particularly dislike about virtual is that there's often parallel conversations going on where I much prefer a single conversation. So Ninik from Indonesia, I mean, you've raised something in the chat on Soups, but it would be lovely to get your voice into the conversation. Is it possible for you to come in? Ninik Suartini.
Hi, how are you? Sorry, it's very low connection here, so I can't really turn on my camera.
We can hear you clearly, so it'll be lovely to just hear your voice. We've got your stuff in the chat, but if you just want to kind of summarize it in case people haven't been following on the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Rehana, and thank you. It's very interesting angle that you take us as the main topic that you start from a very big issue, a very big topic of land use planning, something that we have been copying and pasting from different system and applied in our own local context. Yeah. And then what happened is like you presented and also happened in, I'm sure in many cities around the globe, especially in the global south, that there are failures of land use planning. There are like hiccups that we found on the ground caused by, if you'd like to say, caused by the implementation of land use planning. Then it's very interesting that if we question as planners, as practitioners and academia, then if it doesn't suit the local situation in our city, then the question is what kind of land use plan that we should apply, or we should develop, like you say, theory building. Yeah, about theory building, that's important. So what kind of land use plan then that we need to build, and also if we're going to build, or if we are in the way to building it, then how we communicate, yeah, we communicate this new approach to the mainstream planning paradigm. Yeah.
Thanks, Ninik. Thank you. Sinisha, do you want to come in on the issue around cultural diversity, which you've raised in the chat?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would like to say hello from Serbia. I work in the ministry which is in charge of urban planning here, and I really think that the topic of cultural diversity is very important. I would like to say that on my desk in the office today, I'm not working in the office because of the situation, but I have the strategy of urban development of South Africa. And we are comparing it to our national urban development strategy that we have. And that is really beautiful to exchange ideas between countries which we call the countries of the South, because Serbia, with the problems political that it had, became a bit a country of the South. So when you talk in South Africa about informal construction, we have similar problems in Serbia, and it's interesting to compare how we deal with those problems in different countries. When you asked in the beginning which would be the word that we would like to point out, I would say I was curious about this conversation, and I'm really very, very glad to hear different voices from very different countries. And there I come to that topic of cultural diversity, which is very important because every municipality, every space has its identity. And we should just be aware how important it is. That is why I really support that idea of cultural diversity and diversity in general, diversity of spaces and participation, of course, which is maybe a bit more complicated as a process, but it gives an added value, and we should make the effort really to include those different and diverse voices.
Thanks, Anissa. And as you're sharing, it brings to mind, not in Siwe's visualization studios, but in a separate exercise at the South African Cities Network, we had a colleague from the Informal Settlement Network, the Secretary General, join one of our calls, also kind of sent him data, and he joined our calls, and he was in a conversation with practitioners from the Built Environment Task Team. And Lerato Morales said a very powerful thing. He said, I live in poverty, but it doesn't mean that I have poverty of the mind. I have ideas that I'm able to contribute, and I want my ideas to be heard, and we know what we want. But Subs and Siwe, I want to transition in the last couple of minutes we have left a little bit back to the plenary, and the features we had between Adrian and Kinakile, and this notion of intergenerational conversation in the planning fraternity, and how how young voices and young people and voices that historically have been sidelined, voices of women, people with disability, how do we bring in those voices more strongly, those visions more strongly into how we work together on changing space that is more human and humane, and cities that are more cognizant of the natural environment and Mother Earth and how much she is already giving, and how we can't continue to break her to the extent we are. Subs and then Siwe.
Thanks, Rihanna and colleagues from Serbia, or colleague. I think I've lost it, but anyway, just to respond to that probe, Rihanna, I think the intergenerational work is really interesting, and it's a bit of a dynamic. The dynamic is that now I'm the older planner. I'm no more that young planner that wanted to change and shift things. There's this notion that young planners will also be more progressive. And yes, that is the case. And yes, it's also not the case. But also you need to understand where people come from. Everybody has an aspiration. Not everybody would want to be like me, where I remained a year unemployed because I wanted to be and work in the municipality. A lot of people want to have a car, so we need to appreciate that planners are not a homogeneous group. And they all also have aspirations, and there's nothing wrong in having it. But there's a culture we need to develop at work, and a culture of freedom, expression, and openness. And I would say quite blankly that eThekwini is still very male-orientated. There's a group, there's a culture of, there's what I call a subculture. And if you want to try something new, sometimes you have to try it on the outside, and sometimes you just need to work through those barriers. And not often you get a chance. I think I had many chances, so I was the lucky one. Kinikile would have chances, and I think should also be the lucky one. But there are a number of people that I meet on a daily basis in the municipality. They have great ideas, young planners that want to shift and change things. But also thinking that an older person, and even if you come from a different race group, is naturally conservative and don't want to change. I think that's also the wrong impression to have. And what I'm saying is, you're going to have to figure this out, and you're going to have to grow your alliances as you need to do that. So that would be my response to people within the planning profession. There's also the way we also do planning. Is you come out of university and you come straight to the municipality, or you come in as an intern and you get taken on by an older planner. So you learn exactly my faults. You become my halo effect, you know what I mean? So I think those things also shift and change, and the way we create space, planning and project teams, etc. We must be able to create that, so there's also like young planners can go out and do something. Not just there's an old Farida that's going out. And I'm not saying because you're old, you Farida, and you're conservative. I'm just saying, give it that space. And like I think Dr. Sackler would also always say, let 1,000 flowers bloom and take you through that process.
So these conversations about the underlying stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about now is not about place and placemaking. It's about relationship. It's about tough conversations, the willingness to go into tough conversations. Are those tough conversations happening institutionally? I'm going to invite Yvonne in before Siwe, because I know Siwe still needs to come back. Yvonne, you're also raising the issue on cultural diversity. Can you bring your voice in? I know the chat box is there, but there's something more immediate about voice and expression that the chat box just can't capture, unfortunately.
Thanks, Rihanna. No, I was just saying that, look, our traditions or our cultures actually should influence land use planning. So I was just citing an example between Accra as the capital of Ghana, which is mainly for the gas, and then you have Kumasi, which is another big city. And I mean, the nature of buildings in these two towns are different, because the Ashantis are very family oriented and also inheritance oriented. So you notice that they have a lot of story buildings, and that is to ensure that families live together. So you see that this tradition should be able to actually influence land use planning. So I'm just trying to say that culture plays a role, but are we taking into consideration some of these things when we do our planning in the current era that we find ourselves in?
So that I think that's a really interesting provocation, and you know, which cultures dominate those ordinances and schemes that Subs was talking about. Siwe?
Yeah, Yvonne, that point actually, I think it's very important, but at the same time extremely difficult, especially in a country like South Africa, where we have so many cultures and languages, and especially now with migration and integration, especially with, for example, foreign nationals existing in township spaces, and those tensions that form, whose culture, whose beliefs dominate, and how does that impact the kind of spaces, and who has rights to those different types of spaces. So I think it's extremely difficult. I mean, something that's also come about in the studios to say, I think it's not necessarily about us choosing, between, are we going to remain in this, westernized way of being, or this, completely Wakandanized Africa version, so I think it's also the ability and the right for people to choose to accept certain parts of different cultures and tradition that work for them, and for them to self-actualize in different kinds of ways. But I think what I wanted to pick up on from what Subs was saying in terms of the generational differences, I noticed that she said she's been in the municipality for 26 years, which is exactly for how long I've been alive. So it's really crazy to see, to hear that knowledge and experience of being in the municipality for that long. And for myself as a planner as well, who's never worked in a municipality, and just having a different view of how we can influence spaces and communities outside of the municipality. Which I think is perfect in the way that I found myself at the city's network working with municipal practitioners, but in a different way that I had envisaged when I got into the planning profession. But I think a lot of the tensions that we experience between the older and the younger generation might also be from the fact it's like, it's been 26 years, why, are things not changing? And there's this energy and immediate sort of action that younger people want to take. But also understanding, it's sort of like the energy can sometimes feel like it gets dumbed down when you enter an institution like a municipality. It's like, once you've been here, you'll understand how things work, type of thing. So it's all of those tensions, but I don't think I'm really just very optimistic about these different viewpoints working together to sort of, just bring out some of the tensions, but also finding opportunities for how we can better have better impacts.
So Siwe, it's interesting because it feels like the conversation has brought us full circle to the issue that Bantu was raising right at the beginning of this breakout session. This many years into democracy, we haven't fundamentally transformed our cities. Are we tinkering on the sidelines? Have we fundamentally shifted our practice and our ability to work with people and shape things with people? So I'm going to invite in now voices that we haven't heard yet in this breakaway session. So really, just if you haven't spoken and you have an idea and you want to come forward with it, having listened to all of these, the tensions between many different things, the dancing that needs to happen between perspectives and views and resources and so forth. So I'm not necessarily even going to ask you to raise your hand. We have about 8 minutes left together. So anyone who wants to bring their voice in, having listened to Sub, Siwe, and the conversation that has unfolded with others in the room, please just feel free to step in and step up with your voice.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone in the room. Thank you for the presentation. So in the presentation you did, one of the themes that came out was something around integration. And I noted down that what I think oftentimes happens is that town planners understand the principles around integration, but they don't want to deal with the practical aspects of integration. And an example I have of this is the town planners' focus on land use schemes and things like that. And an example that I have, which you will also know, is, for instance, in the city of eThekwini, town planners took a very proactive role or action to create a public sector housing scheme, land use scheme. And I think the ideas behind having a scheme like that was to allow for new housing developments to take place within a scheme that's already packaged, and it already has all the land controls included within it. And then I remember working for the social housing department in the municipality, where we were basically doing pre-planning work and identifying sites for social housing. And we'd go to one of the departments, it's called public sector housing. And in that department, they'd say, oh, this is easy. There is a public sector housing scheme. Just take that and rezone all your sites into that and you'll be ready to go. But see, if you look at the scheme itself, the scheme, yes, was a good initiative, but the land controls in the scheme, for instance, said that each property that would be built would have to be 40 square meters. And if you look at the program that we were wanting to implement with one of these sites, it's a government program where the size of the housing unit is regulated. It cannot be less than 30 square meters. And there was a conflict between what the town planners put in the scheme and the land controls they put in there and what the program is about. And my point is this, that oftentimes when it comes to integration, maybe planners can take proactive action, but see, planners do not want to focus or put enough energy in learning about the various government programs. So I think there's a mismatch between the efforts we put in and the efforts we put into learning about the programs to get that in alignment. And then one last thing I want to speak about is, I think the facilitator raised the question to you, Soups, which was, how do you begin to break the silos? Because we've often, for many years, we've been speaking about the silos, and how do you break that? I think in the work that we were doing with yourselves last year or a year before, I think we started implementing a practice that starts to break these silos, where instead of having departments want to interact with other departments, what we did is we went to the ground and we focused on meeting the individuals within the departments, going into the departments and speaking to people in the departments, identifying people in the departments and seeing what their values are, what their principles are, what their aspirations are, and working below the radar in that way to be able to break the silos. And there was a perfect example in the work that we did together where we were able to unblock something that the city hadn't been able to resolve for years, and we had a turnaround time of 3 weeks. So I think that there is best practice out there that begins to answer some of these questions. And one last thing, partnerships. Partnerships are important, Subs. And you mentioned this, Uguti, we need to build more alignments between different community stakeholders. That's the one where I think the municipality can take a more proactive role to actually create the avenues for these partnerships to happen, because they are extremely important. Thank you.
So we have a couple of minutes left, and Soups, there's a question that's coming on the chat, which I know is a passion of yours. If planning is this flimsy in established space, we need what more peri-urban and I guess rural areas. So Soups, I'm going to allow you to close as we transition back to plenary in a few minutes, including responding to some of the things Batandwa has raised.
Yes, thank you so much, Rihanna, and all the presenters. I was just listening to the debates, and I'm hearing a lot of integration, a lot of migration, a lot of good plans for the urban centers. But if we plan in isolation, and if we don't recognize the emerging peri-urbanisms, we will never be able to come up with workable plans, because those people, they need to be planned for. We need to come up with something that is workable, and also to make sure that they are catered for, because those are the very same people that create the informal settlements, and the disruptions that we are actually experiencing in the urban core are also partly contributed or attributed the fact that we have peri-urban areas that are never catered for. And most municipalities, whether it's metro or local, they tend to not to recognize these emerging patterns. I don't know, maybe in our...
I'm gonna ask you, just because we have 2 minutes left, sorry to do this, but I'm gonna ask Soups just to round it up as we transition back in the 2 minutes that we have.
Sorry, Immaculate, about that, but I think it's a big question. Also, I think that there's different types and practices of what people have as planning. So rural planning is very different to urban planning, but there is still a similarity between. And my particular response is especially traditional areas. And eThekwini, by the way, we have a lot of area that is under traditional ownership and in peri-urban settlement. You can't just apply a town planning scheme or create something and think it's going to work. You have to work with the culture and practice there. So I think it was Nick, I think, that spoke about land use planning for different places. There's land use planning, different types of land use planning in the same city, even if it is peri-urban or traditional. And I think we need to embrace that. And there's a big thing about control. Who controls and who doesn't. And I think we must be able to let the control go away, let it become less an issue for the benefit of what we're seeking. I also think that linked to this notion of the peri-urban areas, everything is not just about the planner. And I feel really bad when I have these conversations because we often speak about the planner, but there are at least 10 other different built environment types of professionals that are involved. And key to this would be environmentalists and engineers that put in bulks for sanitation, etc. And what we've done is, and a history like South Africa and eThekwini is, we forgot that these were places where you just set aside for apartheid, and now it's become densified. And we need to find ways and research and test how we can have different responses to whether it's water, sanitation, transport, health services. We need to be doing that. And I don't think we pay enough attention on that, as there's a different response in certain areas. And the big thing about peri-urban areas is convenience. You can't expect somebody that doesn't have a car or a taxi, minibus taxi or paid taxi, Ubers or whatever it is, to take you around. You need something where you can just walk around the corner. So I think we need to be able to blend those things. And the work that I've been trying to demonstrate, people are not afraid to do that. We are afraid as the profession to mix up things because we become so streamlined. And what people, and I think responding to Batwanda's question, is the practicality.
Rooms onto a board. So I'm not going to go from breakaway session 1 through to 4. We're going to mix it up a little bit. And I'm going to maybe ask Praveen, who was from SAPI, who was in Breakaway Room 3, the one on establishing community partnerships. Just to give us a sense, for those of us who were not in that breakaway room, as to what was going on there and what were the key issues that emerged in that breakaway session.
No, great, thank you. I trust everyone can hear me.
Yes, we hear you clearly. Thanks, Praveen.
Right, great. Okay. Yeah, obviously I'm feeding back, but the presentation was chaired and facilitated by Zinshe from SAPI. We started off with a normative framework for public participation, and we basically used the International Association of Public Participation spectrum. And in it, although they call it public participation, it has a spectrum of engagement with communities. It's really about a generic format, stroke theoretical framework from experience and case studies over the years, because they were established around the 1960s, 70s or so, or 80s, I can't recall. And there really are 5 sort of areas or categories of public participation and engagement. And that is inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. Okay, and we usually gave details relating to what those actually entailed. And in very simple terms, what are you telling the community, or what are you expecting from the community when you go to them and you tell them, I'm here to inform you? Alternatively, how we actually undertake one activity. For example, it is inform is the greatest, the biggest culprit. We go around informing people of what we're going to do as planners, but we claim that we are empowering them, or we're collaborating with them, or we're involving them. Okay, so there was quite a lot of discussion into that. The key aspects, and then others who were part of it, because I want to summarize and capture what I thought is also a very subjective perspective, was important, is, and the key questions and issues that arise was how to incorporate into formulation. For example, there will be, for argument's sake, right now as we sit, 5G network and bandwidth is quite big. In the last month or so, and I think the closing date is sometime this week, the Broadcasting Complaints or Summary, whatever, the Broadcasting Authority requested comment on that. So they publish it in the Government Gazette, and but how do we meaningfully as planners, because that has an impact on land use planning for a number of reasons, how do we impact and how do we incorporate the spectrum into that policy formulation? Okay. The next issue that was raised and people had to tease out is the difference between a partnership and a dictatorship, and whether some of these are used, strangely enough, although they are on different parts of the spectrum generally, whether they're used interchangeably. Sometimes one say it is a partnership, but there's a dictatorship. And quite often you get it in democracies, in people feel that because representatives have been elected through a democratic process, that's basically, they don't need to really consult with people any further. Okay, and we raised and highlighted the fact that that's quite prevalent in South Africa, and you get that particularly at the local level. Save for people consulting the ward committees or advertising as you require, it is not uncommon for a councillor to say, I'm the councillor, so I will decide. You were not elected. The next point, and some of these are actually not coherent because they're points as they were discussed, okay, is that in the partnerships, in activating partnerships, we need to activate the correct voices. Okay, so particularly the marginalized, i.e. women, children, the homeless, because they also have a role to play. And they basically have a passive role to play in a case such as the homeless. If you ignore the homeless, they don't go away. It becomes a problem. And in Durban, for those people who know about it, is that it takes the form of these people getting into, the culture of drugs and a whole range of other things. So we have a major drug problem in the Durban with the homeless people, and elsewhere, not just homeless people.
So Praveen, on the topic of dictatorship and partnership, I unfortunately, in terms of time, have to dictate. So can I give you one last point before you round up? I know it's difficult to capture, that lengthy discussion into a certain. Yeah. One more.
So I think in all of this, the critical thing that came out is that there's a clear disjuncture between the theory and experience at the practical level of planning. Okay, the politics, the real politic versus what planning takes, how planning actually, how people interface, or planners interface in real life situations also came out. Okay, and politics did come up as a very strong thing. It's something we need to engage with. It's the elephant in the room, and people don't want to talk about politics and planning, or alternatively, politicians and planning and the role that they play in planning. Okay. And I think the last and final point was the role that planners should be playing, in partnerships, and that should be one of enabling and one of being the facilitators. Yeah, I think.
Wonderful. Thanks, Praveen. Wonderful. Milena, can we move to your break? room, Breakaway Room 2.
Yes.
And have you take us through? I know you were still in animated discussion as the rest of us came back to plenary.
Yes, we were extending our animated discussion for 2 more minutes beyond the 12-hour mark. Okay, so let's try to summarize the outcomes of this session. I have to say there's been a lot of voices, a lot of different remarks, a lot of different questions as reaction to our 2 presentations. We had first presentation from Professor Ali Alaouf from Doha, Qatar, which gave us a bit more food for thought to see how can we, what it really means to plan for people, what it means in the perspective of COVID, and what that we need to kind of finally utilize. We speak about the change all the time, but now we need to finally utilize this momentum of COVID to really make the change in the ground. Another presentation we had from Marco Gial from UN Habitat was really up to the point of tools and methods that can be used to increase participation of the public, participation of the citizens. And the one clear point in Mark's presentation was actually the need to change the very difficult language we planners are using because we have such a strict formal education. We tend to think in very complex systems. We are trained to work in complex systems. But when we need to listen to the people, when we need to come to the ground, we need a special new set of skills, a soft set of skills which not everyone has. And next to that soft set of skills, we also need to think about new tools. If I look at myself, if I look at the colleagues here in the Netherlands, we are working all with very sophisticated tools to make urban plans because that's how the system is requiring from us, because the system itself is very complex. But using simple community mapping, simple games, simple digital tools, we can be much more direct to the citizens and really listen to what are their wishes and how do they see the space. There were raised a lot of questions in the chat, but also through the with raised hands. So let's say live questions. There was a lot of questions were raised about the impact of the civic participation. How can it be, increased? How can we get local municipal bodies to really listen to the results of those participatory processes? We had also heard some critical voices from our colleagues at the breakout room. How can we say when we have this high level architecture being somewhere placed, is it really then with the community? What is the role of the community with this high-end real estate development? So those are all very much relevant questions and relevant challenges. I have mentioned that there are ways, and we need to be more aware of that, to utilize tools such as social media to get local municipal bodies and local politicians to listen to us. And finally, as a kind of conclusion, as a red line that was connecting all these issues was, let's use the opportunity of the crisis to try to change the way planning has been done with citizens, to try to raise the impact of co-design and the impact of planning with people. And let's work more on the soft skills of planners, because that's the way how planners can make the bridges between the politicians and the design and the communities.
Thanks, Milena. Can we move to Practitioner as well as that was the one on municipal identities. Colleagues, there are a couple of requests in the chat. Everyone will get a copy of the mural board as well as all the presentations that happened in the different breakaway rooms. So if you were registered for this webinar, you will be receiving all of these summary documents anyway. Practitioner, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rihanna. Yes, so we've had quite a bit of a discussion around municipal identity and building municipal identity from an asset-based approach. And we agreed that, yes, developing municipal identity is quite important. And while you are undertaking this exercise to understand and unlock your assets, there are three things that are quite important. And the first one was public participation. And I can see that it's quite a thread that's coming through the other rooms as well, to say that the public must be involved in your development of the investment directory, but also in the exercise where you are identifying your assets. The second thing that we are taking away is the fact that institutional arrangements are quite important at municipalities. So you would have to have a dedicated municipal investment officer or some sort of employee who's dedicated to identifying the municipal assets, being able to package this in an investment directory, and then obviously market this and take it out to potential investors and developers who are interested in a space. And then just in terms of to add on to the marketing and the packaging, we also had quite a discussion around building and identifying the iconic assets of a municipality and being able to then package this correctly so that people get a sense of a place. So if you're looking at London, for example, it's quite famous for chicken tikka masala. Durban obviously is the home of the bunny chow, but when you are finding something that's relevant to your space, it must be iconic, and you must build on this symbol and package it correctly so that the world knows you for who you are. So Rihanna, thanks. That was just a summary of some of the deliberations that we had in our room. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Prashina. Can we move over to Subs and the room that was looking at the bright side of planning and the incorporation of voices and visions? Subs?
Thanks, Rihanna, and afternoon, everybody. We definitely saw the light. We came out in the afternoon from the morning. So we had quite a robust conversation. Many difficult areas were covered. Not everything had an answer, but at least it was questioned. And we all agree that these are important areas of further investigation. So when I say what did come through was the notion of it's time for theory and planning and practice from the South, and the South being diverse, and Africa being part of the South and also diverse. And what did emerge is, yes, the space is limited, but the opportunity is there, and we should take it on. And the kind of relationships with universities and planning institutions and municipalities, etc., that allows for that to happen. So that was from my colleagues, and if I got the names wrong, apologies, Bantu and Yvonne. I think Yvonne also made the point it doesn't matter what is African urbanism. There's certain things that people all relate to, and they want, like a safe environment, a clean environment, an environment for livelihoods, an environment for opportunities, and one that resolves problems. So I think that all goes in the making of the African urbanization component. But Twanda did raise the question about the modernity of things, and I think what we mean is it's a mixture of urbanization that we see. So it's not one or the other. Just to give some comfort to that and to be real about what is practical. There was the discussion that the likes of the planning we use on a daily basis is so governed and managed by the profession, and sometimes the profession doesn't even know that it's in control and how it can unchange this. And in that regard, the likes of Leka and others raised the issue about it's new, like Spluma is new, and we're still unpacking. And there's a bigger question here is how can we bring in the type of research that we need, so that, and it's not just research for research, but research to be tested and piloted in practice. And again, it's something that we could look at. Then there was a discussion about land use planning being so local, and even in a city like eThekwini, it can be so varied with peri-urban and traditional ownership. And that gives to the talk about how you can world and and have regional notions of planning that's informed from what your society is actually doing. And this was from our colleagues, Nikik, I think, if I got the pronunciation right. So we really need to be localizing and bringing local examples, including local culture into planning. Then lastly was breaking the silos. I think what we picked up on here is it's difficult relationships, but working around combined spaces. There was a clear comment from Tony, just let's talk. From Batwanda, let's start meeting people in our counterparts and addressing the issues we need to. And then there's the idea of bridge makers, you know, taking new ideas, new projects that break and provide for that alliance to actually help. And then lastly, because I know that I'm out of time, there was a notion that when we look at the bright side, we must not forget planning is also about prioritizing and budgets and participatory budgeting, brought up by Sarah from UCLG. And really, this is the budget that gets squeezed. And maybe as planners and the profession and association is to really put this, you know, in the forefront. We speak about catalytic projects. We speak about regeneration, etc. But we must really make the plea to, even if we cut from some things, to bring it to bear in this field, and so we can have as many tests and examples to happen. And then lastly was a question on the planner, and really we really want to expand the notion of the planner, and it's about the built environment. And there's a lot of responsibilities on the planner, but it's really about the profession within the municipality, and it's wider than the planning profession. And I think I've covered the point of peri-urbanism and traditional authorities. And here it was like, how do we share responsibility and how do we make something that actually makes sense? And I think that was a theme in the whole conversation was, how do you gear in everyday people, doesn't matter where they come from, but have a land use planning that starts reflecting these notions of aspirations and build on what people are actually doing. And that also came through from the SACN support. Yeah, on the visual. Thank you.
Thanks, Soups. So colleagues, you can hear you were in different breakaway rooms, but in many ways it feels like we were having similar conversations with different areas of emphasis. And Tando, I'm just going to ask you to zoom out so that colleagues can look at the work we've been doing productively together since 10 o'clock this morning. You have worked incredibly hard. There's been some fascinating discussion, I think, just focusing in on ourselves as our understanding of planning as a profession and how we would take that to a 10-year-old, some of our personal experiences that have shaped us as professionals, then getting the Jakarta experience and then the SACN stuff on SAPI and the launch. Well done and congratulations, Siwe and colleagues at SACN on the launch of your Practitioner Profile magazine on this ISOCARP platform today. And then moving into Breakaway Rooms, having some fascinating discussions about what planning disrupted, what COVID-19 is opening as an opportunity to really, if we look back at that word cloud that we had at the opening of the session, how do we put people at the center of this work that we do as planning professionals with others in our municipalities? And with that, I'm going to hand back to Milena to take us into some plenary conclusions and comments.
Yes, thank you, Johanna. I would like to again thank everyone for this interactive participation. And this is really, I'm very happy to see how this webinar evolves from the first one we had, which had a similar format, how it evolves into this second one, and how much people have expressed their wishes to have another follow-up and another follow-up, and politics and planning has been came up as a possible topic. All other local questions came up as possible topics. Games as tools came up as topics. So there is such a great need and such a great richness of everyone's experience that I think we will we need to build further on that, and we will definitely build further on that in this particular partnership. As a plenary conclusion, I can say that there is definitely what the topic that kind of connects everything, and I think Soups has also mentioned that in one of her last statements, is that planners are these bridge builders, you know, between the politics, between the design, and between the people. Let's try to build our skills further as bridge builders and as moderators between different parties. I think that's a role that we need to fill in the future. I would like to ask if there are some questions at this point, because we still have some time for them. Are there any questions from the audience? Are there some raised hands, or to some comments from our colleagues? If not, then I will.
Milena, there's a hand from Osbert.
Osbert, do you want to give some comment to the final? Oh, sorry. There is also yes.
No, I'm fine with it. It's
okay, then in that case, I would like to ask our colleague Sarah Hoflik from South Africa to give maybe a comment. How did she experience the webinar and the topic of planning for people?
Okay, thank you. I'm connecting here from Barcelona.
Okay.
From the United Cities and Local Governments, and I think it was very interesting and very insightful. The approach of the seminar, what I could listen. I think the work everybody is doing, even virtually. So CV and SUBS have done all this research virtually, I understand. So it's an amazing work and amazing progress. And it was very insightful that actually everybody's on the same page, and that people really want to go into participation and take it seriously forward, to see themselves as facilitator rather than implementer, a bureaucracy or order, find a place in the hierarchy. So I think this was very inspiring. For me, the point, of course, is that it is important to keep visible. So in the end, planning is measured to what will be done and the city, how the city will look like. So I think the question to the 10-year-old is a good one to start and also to close, because in the end, or even if now planning is more becoming a consultation, I think this is a decade and the big change also that we all work, also UN Habitat and the Urban Agenda, all the big documents are really fostering the importance of participation in planning and a less technocratic and a more social approach. But in the end, the community will measure the planner to have implemented and have created a great city. And this is not to forget. So this, I think my takeaways is that now maybe for you as planner in Africa, what I observe, that you feel as a facilitator between bureaucracy and between community, but maybe the role of the council and the role of the councillors is really very, very important, because the local politicians are the ones who take decisions, who do the priority, who are the ones who also have to give their face to all what you prepare, what you implement, what is done for the city that is built up and that in 10 years or in 20 years will be criticized or not. So I think the role of the politicians for another seminar maybe, would be good to work a little bit more, and also to invite some politicians, so to listen to their limitations, and while there is so much divergence between politicians and planner. So I think there are always two sides, and that would be my recommendation. But thank you so much. I enjoyed very much listening to all this and to the great work done in Africa.
Thank you, Sarah, for your final takeaway. I have made so many notes about, as you said, inviting politicians, because that's a role that we are missing a little bit. Maybe to hear their voice in this kind of discussions. That's something that we will definitely bear in mind for our next round. I would like to conclude the webinar and to give you some final information about the materials, because as always in these kind of formats, there is a lot of ideas, there is a lot of things that have been captured. So we will share that with you, all these mural boards. And thank you for South African Cities Network for being such a good scribes and taking all these notes for us, being busy in talks and dialogues. We will also share other relevant material, so you can find it on our respective websites. Since you are all registered to be part of this webinar, you will get the package with links, so you can find the visuals that have been presented here at the webinar. Back to you, Johanna, to give the final closing word.
Thanks, Milena. So, Milena, you know, the issue of planners as bridge builders, in that video that you were watching of South African Cities Network, and you saw those sheets of paper across the floor and people were trying to reach each other across that. That was actually an activity called, and interestingly, it comes from a transport analogy, mind the gap, build the bridge. And so I think whether those gaps are between North and South, whether those gaps are between an emerging African urbanism and a more Eurocentric way of seeing planning, whether those gaps are in municipalities as institutions, or whether those gaps are between planners and politicians, planners or municipal practitioners and communities, it really is time to mind the gap and build the bridges. Thank you very much to everyone who has attended, all who have supported in the background, to all of the partners to this association, and we're super grateful that you were here. And Milena, thank you to ISOCARP for all of the technical work in keeping it all together as well.
Yes, it's been our pleasure. It's also our task as a Knowledge Institute to do so. So, well, let's hope to see you all on the third edition of Planning Disrupted, which is already planned. I already have a title, Mind the Gap, so I think we can continue on that one. And yes, thank you also very much for participating and taking your time to listen to us and discuss with us. Thank you so much.